There are moments in history when the line between reality and myth blurs, when whispered secrets in shadowy rooms ripple outward with terrifying consequences. Behind some of the darkest chapters of the 20th century lurked a web of secret societies, their beliefs shaping the fates of nations in ways most people never even suspected. And among them, one name stands out, a group so enigmatic, so steeped in the occult, that its influence reached the highest echelons of power, the Thule Society. Picture this: a gathering of mystics, scholars, and fanatics, convinced they held the keys to ancient truths, obsessed with lost civilizations like Atlantis, and driven by a terrifying vision of racial purity. These weren't just fringe eccentrics, their ideas fueled the very ideology of the Nazi regime, weaving cosmic myths into the fabric of genocide. What if I told you that Hitler's rise to power wasn't just about politics or economics, but about something far stranger? The Thule Society believed in a cosmic battle between forces of light and darkness, where the so-called Aryan race was destined to rule as godlike beings. They scoured ancient texts, searched for hidden relics, and even dabbled in rituals they thought could harness supernatural power. Their theories were a bizarre mix of pseudoscience and occult fantasy, claims of a lost Hyperborean homeland, whispers of Nordic supermen descended from Atlantis, and a fanatical conviction that the world needed to be purified through blood and fire. This isn't just a footnote in history, it's a chilling reminder of how easily myth can be twisted into dogma, how easily madness can dress itself as enlightenment. Over the next few minutes, we're going to peel back the layers of this shadowy group, uncovering the strange and terrifying beliefs that drove them. How did a secret society obsessed with runes and rituals come to influence the architects of the Holocaust? What did they really believe about Aryans, Atlantis, and the forces they thought governed the universe? Strap in, because this journey will take us from the edges of ancient mythology to the heart of one of history's most sinister movements, and by the end, you'll never look at the past the same way again. The Thule Society didn't emerge from thin air. It was born from a swirling mix of fear, mysticism, and a desperate longing for lost greatness. In the chaotic aftermath of World War I, as Germany reeled from defeat and revolution, a group of disenchanted intellectuals and far-right radicals gathered in Munich. Officially founded in 1918, they called themselves the Thule Society, named after a legendary northern paradise mentioned in ancient Greek texts. But this was no harmless book club. These men saw themselves as guardians of a forgotten truth, heirs to an Aryan legacy they believed stretched back to a mythical golden age. Their roots ran deep into the Völkisch movements of pre-war Germany, a tangled web of nationalist groups obsessed with racial purity, folklore, and the occult. Think of it as a dark undercurrent of romanticism, where fairy tales about Germanic heroes twisted into paranoid fantasies about Jewish conspiracies and cosmic racial hierarchies. The Thule Society took these ideas and cranked them up to a fever pitch. They mixed astrology, rune magic, and pseudo-scientific racial theories into a toxic brew, convinced that hidden forces, both supernatural and worldly, controlled history. What set them apart was their obsession with Thule, the supposed homeland of a lost Aryan super-civilization. Some claimed it was Atlantis by another name, others said it lay buried beneath the Arctic ice. Either way, the Thule Society believed their ancestors had possessed godlike powers before falling into decline, and it was their sacred duty to restore that glory. This wasn't just nostalgia, it was a call to arms. They saw modernity as corrupt, democracy as weak, and the so-called lesser races as existential threats. Every meeting, every ritual was a step toward reclaiming what they thought was stolen. And here's where things get even darker. The Thule Society wasn't content with just theorizing. They actively sought influence, infiltrating politics, funding paramilitary groups, and even forming early ties with a young Adolf Hitler. Their newsletter, the Münchner Beobachter, would later evolve into the Nazi Party's official newspaper. These weren't just dreamers, they were architects of catastrophe, blending esoteric nonsense with ruthless ambition. The line between myth and murder had never been so thin. Rudolf von Sebottendorff wasn't just the Thule Society's founder. He was a walking paradox, a man who blended Eastern mysticism with Nordic obsession in ways that would make your head spin. Born in 1875 under the name Adam Alfred Rudolf Glauer, this self-styled baron had a past as murky as the occult rituals he promoted. After years traveling through Turkey and Egypt, he became obsessed with Sufism, numerology, and the idea of hidden masters guiding humanity. But when he returned to Germany, his fascination took a dark turn. He began weaving these esoteric threads into a new tapestry, one where secret initiation rites and ancient Aryan supremacy became inseparable. His book, Before Hitler Came, later claimed the Thule Society laid the ideological groundwork for Nazism, though historians still debate how much was truth and how much was self-aggrandizing myth. Then there was Dietrich Eckart, the alcoholic playwright turned fanatical ideologue who famously boasted on his deathbed, "Follow Hitler, he will dance, but it is I who called the tune." Eckart wasn't just Hitler's mentor, he was his gateway into Munich's occult underworld. A Thule Society insider, Eckart introduced Hitler to its wealthy backers while indoctrinating him with twisted interpretations of Nordic sagas and racial theories. He saw Hitler not as a politician but as a messianic figure, the German Moses who would lead the Aryan people to salvation. Their conversations late into the night blended Wagnerian opera, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and bizarre cosmological visions where the war against Jews became a cosmic battle against dark forces. These men weren't operating alone. The Thule Society's inner circle read like a who's who of dangerous eccentrics. Karl Hochhofer, the geographer who mixed geopolitics with Tibetan mysticism to invent the living space theory justifying Nazi expansion. Julius Streicher, the vicious propagandist who turned Thule's racial paranoia into the venomous pages of Der Stürmer newspaper. Even Hans Frank, Hitler's personal lawyer who late orchestrated the Holocaust in Poland while carrying a bizarre fixation on Teutonic Knights and Holy Grail legends. What united them wasn't just political extremism but a shared delusion that by decoding ancient symbols and purging impure bloodlines, they could trigger some kind of racial awakening. The most chilling part, they didn't see themselves as monsters. Sebottendorff genuinely believed his rituals could awaken dormant Aryan powers. Eckart thought he was composing a heroic saga for the modern age. Their blend of pseudo-history and esoteric fantasy created a feedback loop where every myth reinforced their violence. Every conspiracy theory justified new atrocities. When you peel back the layers, the Thule Society reveals a terrifying truth: how easily human beings can dress up their darkest impulses as sacred destiny, how fantasy can become fuel for real-world horror. The connection between the Thule Society and the Nazi Party wasn't just ideological, it was financial, symbolic, and shockingly direct. Long before Hitler became a household name, the Thule Society's wealthy backers funneled money into his early political efforts, treating him as their chosen vessel for a radical vision of Aryan dominance. Their meeting halls in Munich became incubators for the Nazi Party's earliest recruits, with Thule members like Rudolf Hess and Alfred Rosenberg later rising to key positions in the Third Reich. But perhaps the most visible legacy of this toxic alliance, the swastika itself, an ancient symbol twisted into a banner of hate. Here's how it happened. The Thule Society had long used the swastika in their rituals, believing it represented the sun, cosmic power, and the purity of their so-called Aryan ancestors. When Hitler needed a striking emblem for his growing movement, it was Thule member Friedrich Krohn who reportedly drafted the first designs, rotating the symbol to give it a more aggressive, dynamic appearance. The black, white, and red color scheme, also a Thule signature, echoing their obsession with Germanic mythology and racial symbolism. This wasn't just branding, it was a deliberate act of myth-making, turning an occult sigil into the most recognizable icon of terror the modern world has ever seen. Money flowed just as freely as ideas. Thule Society financiers like Dietrich Eckart and industrialist Hugo Boss, yes, that Hugo Boss, provided critical early funding to Hitler's fledgling party. Eckart even used his newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter, to amplify Nazi propaganda, ensuring the Thule's racial theories reached a wider audience. But the relationship was always uneasy. Once the Nazis seized power, Hitler distanced himself from the occult trappings of his benefactors, fearing their mystical leanings might undermine his image as a rational leader. By the late 1930s, the regime began suppressing secret societies, including the Thule, but their influence was already baked into Nazi doctrine. The irony is staggering. A group obsessed with ancient mysteries handed the Nazis their most potent visual weapons, bankrolled their rise, and then found themselves erased by the very monster they helped create. Their ideas didn't just linger in the shadows, they became state policy, fueling the Holocaust under the guise of racial science. The swastika on the armband, the myth of Aryan supremacy, even the occult-tinged rhetoric of Nazi leadership, all bore the fingerprints of the Thule Society's darkest fantasies. They proved, in the end, how easily symbolism can be weaponized, how quickly conspiracy theories can become catastrophe. At the heart of the Thule Society's twisted ideology lay Hyperborea, a mythical Arctic paradise they believed was the cradle of the Aryan race. Unlike the frozen wastelands we know today, their Hyperborea was a sun-drenched utopia, a land of eternal spring where golden-haired giants walked among towering crystal temples. These weren't just stories to them, they were sacred history, a lost chapter in the destiny of their so-called master race. Ancient Greek texts mentioned Hyperborea as a place beyond the north wind, home to a blessed people untouched by war or disease. But the Thule Society mangled these fragments into something far darker, claiming this was the original homeland of the Aryans, a godlike civilization with advanced technology, psychic powers, and pure white skin untouched by the corruption of other races. Their obsession wasn't just about nostalgia, it was a racial origin story warped into a weapon. According to Thule lore, these Hyperborean superhumans had migrated south over millennia, founding great civilizations like Atlantis before slowly degenerating through mixing with inferior peoples. Every myth, every symbol was twisted to fit this narrative. The swastika, a Hyperborean sun wheel, Norse runes encoded messages from their ancestors. Even the concept of the Holy Grail got dragged into it, with some Thule members claiming it was a bloodline, not a cup, a metaphor for preserving the pure Aryan essence. The so-called evidence was a patchwork of pseudoscience and wild speculation. They pointed to everything from Inuit legends to alleged Arctic rock formations as proof of Hyperborea's existence. One Thule-affiliated scholar, Herman Wirth, spent years trying to decipher a supposed prehistoric Nordic script he called the Jura Linda Chronicle, which he claimed held secrets of Aryan migration, never mind that linguists dismissed it as an obvious 19th century forgery. Another favorite proof was the hollow earth theory, which suggested the Arctic concealed hidden entrances to a subterranean world where Aryans might still dwell. What made this fantasy so dangerous was how it fueled their genocidal politics. If Aryans were the last remnants of a godlike race, then purifying humanity wasn't just a political goal, it was a sacred duty. They spoke of breeding programs, eugenics, and extermination as if they were restoring some divine order. When Heinrich Himmler later established the Onana, the Nazi research division tasked with proving Aryan supremacy, its expeditions to Tibet and Scandinavia were directly inspired by Thule's Hyperborean delusions. They weren't just hunting for relics, they were searching for validation of their blood-soaked mythology. The cruel irony, Hyperborea, as the Greeks imagined it, was a land of peace and harmony where people lived free from suffering. The Thule Society's version was its grotesque opposite, a nightmare of racial hierarchy, violence, and paranoid obsession. In their desperate scramble to rewrite history, they revealed the ugliest truth of all, that fascism always needs a golden age to mourn, a scapegoat to blame, and a myth grand enough to justify its horrors. The Thule Society's obsession with Atlantis wasn't just another myth. It was a warped reflection of their deepest fears and ambitions, repurposed from the mystical writings of Helena Blavatsky. The founder of Theosophy, Blavatsky spun elaborate tales of lost continents and ancient root races in books like The Secret Doctrine, claiming humanity had evolved through cycles of spiritual and racial purity. But where Blavatsky spoke in vague, metaphysical terms, the Thule Society sharpened her ideas into a weapon. They seized on her description of Atlantis as a technologically advanced civilization, insisting it had been an Aryan colony, one destroyed not by natural disaster, but by the sin of interbreeding with lesser races. This wasn't idle speculation, it became their founding trauma. Theosophy's 7 root races, each representing stages of spiritual evolution, got twisted into a rigid racial hierarchy. The Thule Society latched onto Blavatsky's claim that the 5th race, the Aryans, were the heirs of Atlantis, destined to ascend to godhood if they remained pure. Never mind that Blavatsky herself never endorsed violence or biological racism. Her esoteric framework was stripped of nuance and repackaged as a pseudo-scientific mandate for genocide. Atlantis became a cautionary tale, a rallying cry: mix the bloodlines and civilization falls. The parallels to their own time were deliberate. Just as Atlantis had supposedly collapsed into decadence, Weimar Germany, with its cultural experimentation, its jazz music, its interwar cosmopolitanism, was framed as another slide into racial degeneracy. The Thule Society's solution, a return to mythical purity. Their inner circle, like the fanatical Julius Evola, even claimed Atlantean survivors had fled to underground cities or remote mountain peaks, preserving secret knowledge that could restore Aryan dominance. It was a seductive fantasy for those hungry for power, the idea that by purging the unworthy, they could resurrect a lost golden age. This myth-making had real-world consequences. When the Nazis later enforced the Nuremberg laws banning marriage between Jews and non-Jews, they weren't just enacting prejudice, they were performing what they saw as sacred racial hygiene. Heinrich Himmler's Onanab expeditions weren't merely archaeological vanity projects. They were literal treasure hunts for Atlantean relics rumored to hold the key to Aryan supremacy. Even the Nazis' obsession with Antarctica in the late 1930s, funded by expeditions searching for Neuschwabenland, stemmed from fringe theories that Atlantean ruins lay beneath the ice. The cruel irony, Blavatsky's Theosophy was meant to promote universal brotherhood, a spiritual unity beyond race. Yet in the hands of the Thule Society, her vision of Atlantis became a blueprint for apartheid, a nightmare where history itself was rewritten to justify slaughter. Their version of Atlantis wasn't a sunken city, it was a mirror reflecting the darkest depths of human obsession, where ancient myths were hollowed out and stuffed with hatred. The lesson here isn't just about how myths can be weaponized, but how easily the search for lost glory can become a crusade against the present. The stars weren't just distant lights to the Thule Society, they were a cosmic clockwork ticking down to what they believed would be the rebirth of Aryan dominance. Their obsession with astrology went far beyond personal horoscopes. They saw the heavens as a battlefield where planetary alignments could herald racial triumph or doom. When Hitler launched the Beer Hall Putsch in November 1923, the date wasn't chosen at random. Thule insiders like Rudolf Hess, an ardent astrologer, insisted the coup attempt coincided with a rare conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, a celestial signal they interpreted as destiny calling the Aryans to rise. This wasn't just superstition, it was strategy. The Thule Society's inner circle pored over ancient star charts and hermetic texts, convinced that history moved in cycles dictated by the stars. They latched onto the idea of the Great Year, a 26,000-year astrological cycle supposedly marking the rise and fall of civilizations. In their twisted logic, the Aryan race had reached its lowest point, but the stars promised resurgence. Every comet, every eclipse became an omen. When Halley's comet streaked across the sky in 1910, Thule mystics claimed it was a divine portent, a fiery herald of the coming Aryan awakening. The Nazis later weaponized this cosmic fatalism. Heinrich Himmler kept a team of astrologers on payroll, charting invasion dates based on planetary positions. The invasion of Poland in 1939, carefully timed to align with what they believed were favorable celestial conditions. Even the swastika's rotation was said to mirror the movement of constellations, channeling cosmic energy into their cause. The Thule Society's star-obsessed delusions had become state policy, blending pseudoscience with prophecy to justify conquest. But the darkest irony lay in their selective reading of the cosmos. They ignored the Babylonian origins of astrology, the very cultures they deemed inferior who had first mapped the stars. Their vision of destiny was a closed loop, a self-fulfilling prophecy written in constellations they alone could decipher. When the war turned against them, some Nazis still clung to astrological hope, convinced a last-minute celestial shift would save them. The stars, of course, remained indifferent. The universe doesn't conspire for empires, it simply watches as they rise, and then inevitably fall. Beneath the ice and rock of our world, the Thule Society believed an entire civilization of Aryan superbeings thrived, waiting to reclaim the surface. This wasn't just fantasy, it was doctrine. Their fixation on the hollow earth theory spiraled into real expeditions, real funding, and real delusions that cost lives. At the heart of this madness lay Agartha, a mythical subterranean kingdom rumored to hold advanced technology, giant cities, and the last uncorrupted descendants of Hyperborea. The Nazis didn't just entertain this idea, they sent scientists, spies, and SS officers across the globe to find its hidden entrances. The myth of Agartha had been floating through occult circles for decades, popularized by figures like the French mystic Alexander Saint-Yves d'Alveder, who claimed to have accessed secret maps of this underground world. But the Thule Society took it further. They insisted Agartha wasn't just a refuge, it was a military asset. Whispers spread of Vril energy, a cosmic force Agarthans allegedly harnessed to power flying machines and weapons. Some Thule members even believed Adolf Hitler himself was in psychic communication with Agartha's rulers, receiving guidance for his campaign of conquest. By the late 1930s, these fantasies morphed into action. Heinrich Himmler's Onanab, the Nazi Research Bureau obsessed with proving Aryan supremacy, dispatched teams to caves in the Himalayas, the Andes, and even Antarctica. Their most infamous mission, the 1938 Nazi expedition to Tibet, led by zoologist Ernst Schäfer. Officially, it was an anthropological study. In reality, Schäfer's team hunted for clues to Agartha's location, interrogating monks about secret underground tunnels and measuring skulls to prove Tibetans were distant Aryan cousins. They returned with hundreds of artifacts, including ancient Tibetan texts they believed held directions to the inner world. The Antarctic obsession was even more telling. In 1939, the Nazis claimed a swath of the frozen continent, naming it Neuschwabenland after the medieval German region. Rumors swirled that they'd found warm air vents leading deep underground, potential gateways to Agartha. Conspiracy theorists later claimed the Nazis built secret bases there, stockpiling stolen technology. While historians dismiss much of this as fantasy, the truth is unsettling enough. The Third Reich wasted precious wartime resources chasing fairy tales. What made the Hollow Earth theory so dangerous was how it amplified their racial madness. If Agathans were pure Aryans, uncorrupted by surface world mixing, then finding them wasn't just exploration, it was a eugenicist's holy grail. SS scientists speculated about breeding programs with Agathan women to reinvigorate the Aryan bloodline. Others dreamed of allying with Agatha's armies to launch a final global purge. In the end, their expeditions found nothing but ice and shadows. But the Hollow Earth myth outlived the Nazis, morphing into conspiracy theories about UFOs and hidden master races, proof that when fanatics mistake legend for truth, the damage lingers long after their empires crumble. The rituals of the Thule Society weren't just pageantry. They were carefully crafted theater, designed to bind members in blood oaths and awaken what they believed were dormant Aryan powers. Meetings often began in near darkness, with hooded figures encircling a swastika-adorned altar, chanting runic verses they claimed could summon ancestral spirits. Initiates underwent ceremonies straight out of a Gothic nightmare, forced to swear loyalty while gripping a dagger smeared with animal blood, their hands pressed against ancient Germanic symbols carved into oak tablets. The message was clear: betrayal meant supernatural retribution. These weren't empty gestures. The Thule Society genuinely believed their rituals could manipulate invisible forces, that chanting the right words in the right order might tilt the cosmic scales in their favor. One of their most infamous symbols, the Black Sun, started as an occult emblem before becoming a centerpiece of SS mysticism. Originally a 12-spoked wheel resembling a hidden sun, the Thule Society used it in secret meditations, claiming it channeled Vril energy, a supposed life force from the Earth's core. When Heinrich Himmler renovated Wewelsburg Castle as an SS cult headquarters, he installed a black sun mosaic in the floor of the Hall of the Dead, where officers conducted pseudo-religious rites. The symbolism was deliberate. Just as the Thule Society had tried to harness cosmic power, the SS would now weaponize it. Then there was the Totenkopf, the grinning skull that became synonymous with Nazi terror. Long before death's head insignias appeared on SS uniforms, the Thule Society revered skulls as vessels of ancestral wisdom. In their Munich lodge, initiates handled human skulls during ceremonies, whispering oaths into the hollowed bone as if the dead could hear them. This macabre fascination wasn't just about intimidation. It reflected their obsession with reconnecting to a mythic Aryan past. When the SS later adopted the Totenkopf, they sanitized its occult origins, but the underlying message remained: loyalty beyond death. The theft didn't stop there. Runes like the Sowilo, resembling a lightning bolt, and the tear and arrow pointing upward, were stripped of their original meanings. Symbols once representing sun and justice became shorthand for SS divisions and Nazi ideology. Even the ceremonial daggers SS officers carried mirrored Thule Society initiation blades, their steel inscribed with runes meant to purify the wielder. Every borrowed symbol, every repurposed ritual served the same twisted goal: to dress modern brutality in the garb of ancient mysticism, transforming genocide into some perverse holy war. What makes this cultural theft so chilling is how seamlessly the occult bled into the institutional. The Thule Society's private fantasies became state-sponsored spectacle. Himmler's midnight solstice celebrations at Wewelsburg, the SS's rune-embroidered banners, even the Nazi wedding ceremonies where couples exchanged vows over a copy of Mein Kampf instead of a Bible. They built an entire aesthetic of power, borrowing sacred geometry from pagan temples and warrior codes from Viking sagas, all while gutting their original context. The result was something entirely new, a death cult masquerading as tradition, where every stolen symbol served as another brick in the wall between myth and massacre. The Thule Society's obsession with sacred relics wasn't about archaeology, it was a desperate scramble for divine validation. At the top of their list stood the Spear of Destiny, the weapon said to have pierced Christ's side on the cross. Legend claimed whoever possessed it could dictate the fate of nations, and Hitler became fixated on this idea after seeing the artifact in Vienna's Hofburg Museum as a young man. The spear's history was already layered with myth. Charlemagne, Frederick Barbarossa, and Napoleon were all rumored to have wielded it, but the Thule Society reinterpreted these stories through their racial lens. To them, the spear wasn't just a Christian relic, it was an Aryan birthright stolen by history and waiting to be reclaimed by its true inheritors. When Hitler annexed Austria in 1938, one of his first acts was to transport the spear to Nuremberg under SS guard. He didn't just want to own it, he wanted to harness what he believed was its supernatural power. Thule mystics had convinced him the spear's ownership cycle followed a 700-year pattern, and 1938 supposedly marked the moment it would transfer its energy to a new ruler. Nuremberg wasn't chosen randomly either. As the site of Nazi party rallies, it became a stage for their ritualistic pageantry, the spear displayed like a talisman of impending victory. The irony, historians later confirmed the Hofburg spear was likely a medieval replica, but facts never mattered to those drunk on myth. Their hunt for the Holy Grail followed even stranger logic. Most imagine the Grail as a cup from the Last Supper, but the Thule Society embraced an alternate theory that it was actually the sangreal or royal blood, a coded reference to the preserved bloodline of Christ. This concept, popularized by occultists like Otto Rahn, fit perfectly with their racial ideology. If the Grail was genetic purity rather than an object, then finding it meant tracing an unbroken Aryan lineage back to divine origins. Rahn's expeditions to Cathar castles in southern France weren't just treasure hunts, they were attempts to prove the Cathars, a medieval Christian sect, were secret guardians of this bloodline before being exterminated by the Catholic Church. Heinrich Himmler took this fantasy to grotesque extremes. He dispatched teams to Montségur, where the last Cathar stronghold fell in 1244, convinced the Grail had been smuggled out before the siege. SS officers combed through caves, measured skulls in nearby villages, and even staged midnight ceremonies on the mountain, believing the exact date of the massacre held occult significance. Meanwhile, other Thule-influenced researchers scoured German monasteries for Grail manuscripts, convinced the truth lay hidden in coded chivalric romances. The absurdity reached its peak when Himmler reportedly tried to recreate the Grail by commissioning a crystal vessel inscribed with runes, blending Christian symbolism with pagan mysticism into something entirely new and entirely unholy. What made these quests so chilling was their deadly practicality. The Thule Society and their Nazi successors weren't just collecting curios, they were building a theological framework for genocide. If the Spear of Destiny legitimized conquest and the Grail symbolized racial purity, then every death camp became a perverse altar in their twisted crusade. These weren't artifacts to them, they were excuses, divine permission slips for atrocities written in blood rather than ink. The tragic truth, no relic, no matter how legendary, could have saved them from the consequences of their own madness. The spear didn't stop the Allies, the Grail didn't purify their bloodline, and in the end, the only destiny they fulfilled was their own destruction. Among the crumbling empires and post-war chaos of early 20th century Europe, the Thule Society didn't just stumble upon their anti-Semitic beliefs, they actively hunted for proof to validate their darkest fantasies. Enter the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a forged document so blatantly fraudulent that even its creators likely never imagined it would be taken seriously. But for the Thule Society, this crude fabrication wasn't just propaganda, it was scripture. They seized on its pages like a revelation, convinced it exposed a hidden Jewish plot to dominate the world through finance, revolution, and cultural decay. To them, it wasn't a hoax, it was a battle map revealing the contours of what they saw as a cosmic war between Aryan purity and so-called Jewish materialism. The protocols first surfaced in Russia in the early 1900s, cobbled together from plagiarized political satire and paranoid fiction. Its anonymous authors claimed to be transcripts of secret meetings where Jewish leaders plotted global domination, a narrative so ludicrous that multiple investigations debunked it by the 1920s. Yet the Thule Society didn't care about facts. They needed a villain, and the protocols provided one with cinematic scope. Members like Alfred Rosenberg, later the Nazi Party's chief ideologue, distributed the text across Germany, weaving its conspiracy theories into their own racial dogma. Suddenly, every stock market crash, every labor strike, every avant-garde art exhibit became evidence of the grand Jewish conspiracy outlined in the protocols. What made this fabrication so potent was how it mirrored the Thule Society's occult cosmology. Just as they believed in hidden masters guiding Aryan destiny, the protocols painted Jews as puppet masters pulling history's strings. It wasn't enough to frame Jews as political opponents. They had to be mythic adversaries, a shadowy force corrupting civilization itself. This wasn't prejudice, it was apocalyptic storytelling. When Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, he lifted entire passages from the protocols, transforming its absurd claims into Nazi gospel. By the time Goebbels' propaganda machine amplified these ideas, the lie had hardened into a collective delusion that justified everything from boycotts to mass murder. The irony is staggering. The very people accusing Jews of secret scheming were themselves a cabal of mystics and fanatics, obsessively crafting rituals to summon Aryan gods. The protocols didn't just inspire their hatred, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. As they ransacked Jewish homes during Kristallnacht or herded families into ghettos, they genuinely believed they were preempting a Jewish takeover foretold in their own twisted Bible. The deeper tragedy, this wasn't just a fringe obsession. The protocols spread globally, endorsed by industrialists and politicians who'd never set foot in a Thule lodge but embraced its paranoia all the same. By the time the Holocaust began, the lie had evolved beyond paper. The protocols were no longer just a text, they were a lens warping how an entire regime viewed reality. When SS officers sorted prisoners at Auschwitz, they weren't just following orders, they were enacting what they saw as a sacred counter-conspiracy. The Thule Society's fixation on cosmic enemies had metastasized into genocide, proving how easily fiction can become fuel for atrocity when dressed in the robes of prophecy. The protocols didn't just predict a fictional Jewish plot, they scripted a very real one, written not by elders in a shadowy chamber, but by true believers in uniforms marching to the rhythm of their own invented doom. If the Thule Society's obsession with lost civilizations bordered on madness, their fixation with Vril energy plunged them straight into the realm of science fiction. This wasn't just another esoteric idea, it was the cornerstone of their belief in Aryan supremacy, repackaged as physics. They claimed Vril was a cosmic life force, a raw energy flowing through the universe that their ancestors had mastered before their supposed fall from grace. To tap into it meant unlocking superhuman strength, telepathy, even control over gravity itself, and they weren't content with just meditating on the idea. They wanted to weaponize it. The concept of Vril didn't originate with the Thule Society. It first appeared in an 1871 novel, The Coming Race, by British writer Edward Bulwer Lytton. His book described an advanced subterranean civilization wielding Vril through psychic staffs, capable of healing or destroying with a thought. But where Bulwer Lytton wrote fantasy, the Thule Society read it as hidden history. They became convinced that the novel was a veiled account of real Aryan technology suppressed by lesser races. Suddenly, fiction became their blueprint for the future. What followed was a bizarre marriage of mysticism and pseudoscience. Thule theorists like Karl Horshofer speculated that Tibetan monks had preserved Vril techniques through secret breathing exercises. Others, like Rudolf von Sebottendorff, insisted ancient German runes were actually coded instructions for channeling the energy. Their experiments ranged from the laughable to the chilling. Initiates would sit for hours in darkened rooms, visualizing streams of golden light pouring into their bodies, convinced they were reawakening dormant Aryan DNA. Some even claimed to feel surges of power, though historians suspect these were textbook cases of self-hypnosis mixed with wishful thinking. But the real danger emerged when these delusions collided with Nazi ambition. By the 1930s, Vril wasn't just a meditation technique, it was a state-funded research project. The SS established a secret unit called Sonderbüro Vril, tasked with turning occult fantasy into military hardware. They recruited engineers, physicists, and even psychics, chasing rumors of Nazi flying discs powered by Vril energy. Some sources suggest they tested primitive jet engines shrouded in esoteric symbolism, hoping to tap into this mythical force. The irony, while actual scientists like Wernher von Braun were building real rockets at Peenemünde, Himmler's acolytes wasted resources chasing a fairy tale. The legacy of this obsession outlived the Third Reich. Post-war UFO sightings in Germany and South America were often attributed to escaped Nazi Vril technology, spawning conspiracy theories that persist today. The Thule Society's greatest trick wasn't harnessing cosmic energy, it was convincing desperate men that supremacy could be unlocked like a hidden circuit breaker, that power wasn't earned through work or wisdom, but whispered in runes or buried in pulp fiction. Vril promised godhood without effort, dominance without doubt, and in the end, all it really powered was their descent into self-destruction. Heinrich Himmler didn't just adopt the Thule Society's occult fantasies, he bureaucratized them, turning esoteric nonsense into the official doctrine of the SS. To understand how deeply Thule's ideas infected the Nazi regime, look no further than Wewelsburg Castle, Himmler's pet project and the twisted spiritual heart of the SS. Purchased in 1934, this medieval fortress wasn't just a headquarters, it was a stage for Himmler's delusions of grandeur, meticulously redesigned to mirror Thule's obsession with Germanic mysticism. The castle's north tower became a sacred space, its circular Hall of the Dead, featuring a black sun mosaic where SS officers conducted pseudo-religious rites. Here, beneath flickering torchlight, Himmler's inner circle would gather around a stone altar, swearing oaths to their Führer as if he were some Nordic god-king reborn. Every architectural detail carried symbolic weight. 12 pedestals represented legendary knights, the vaulted ceiling evoked Valhalla. Even the castle's renovation costs were justified as investment in ancestral memory. This wasn't decoration, it was indoctrination in stone and mortar. The rituals performed at Wewelsburg would have felt eerily familiar to any Thule Society initiate. Himmler resurrected their obsession with solstice celebrations, hosting elaborate ceremonies where SS men, dressed in black robes, reenacted what they imagined were ancient Germanic rites. They lit bonfires, chanted runic verses, and even staged mock weddings where brides received copies of Mein Kampf instead of Bibles, the most macabre tradition. The Totenkopfring, a silver skull ring awarded to senior SS officers, inscribed with runes and the bearer's name. Upon death, the ring would be returned to Wewelsburg and placed in a casket as if the castle were some unholy reliquary. Himmler genuinely believed these theatrics could forge an unbreakable spiritual bond among his men, transforming thugs and bureaucrats into modern-day Teutonic knights. Then there was the Onanub Himmler's laughable yet terrifying Ancestral Heritage Research Division. Staffed by a mix of genuine academics and fanatical cranks, its mission was simple: scour the globe for proof of Aryan supremacy, no matter how absurd the premise. One team dug up Bronze Age urns in Scandinavia, convinced the pottery patterns held encoded messages from Hyperborean ancestors. Another expedition hacked through Tibetan mountainsides, measuring skulls and photographing locals in a desperate hunt for pure Aryan traits. The infamous Ernst Scheffer even returned with a handwritten letter from a Tibetan Lama, which Himmler treated as divine validation. never mind that it likely praised the Nazis to secure political favors. But the Ononub's darkest work happened in plain sight. Their so-called scientific studies provided pseudoscientific cover for genocide, documenting racial hierarchies that justified euthanasia programs and death camps. When SS doctors conducted grotesque experiments on prisoners, they often cited Ononub publications to legitimize their work. The line between occult fantasy and industrialized murder had vanished entirely. What began as Thule's parlor games ended as mass graves. The cruelest joke, Himmler's obsession with relics and rituals didn't save the Reich. As Soviet troops closed in during 1945, he ordered Wewelsburg blown up to prevent its sacred spaces from being defiled. The castle survived, scarred but standing, a hollow monument to the hubris of men who mistook fairy tales for history and superstition for power. The Thule Society didn't exist in a vacuum. It was part of a tangled web of secret societies, each borrowing from and warping the ideas of the others like a game of occult telephone. Take the Freemasons, whose elaborate rituals and hierarchical lodges the Thule Society mimicked, but with a sinister twist. Where Freemasonry spoke of universal brotherhood and Enlightenment ideals, the Thule twisted these concepts into exclusionary blood covenants, replacing the Masonic square and compass with runes and swastikas. They even adopted initiation rites, hooded ceremonies, symbolic grips, but rather than teaching moral allegories, their rituals drilled in racial dogma. It's no coincidence that Hitler later vilified the Freemasons as part of the so-called Jewish conspiracy, even as he recycled their structure for his own cult of personality. Then there was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the British occult group that counted Aleister Crowley and W.B. Yeats among its members. The Golden Dawn's influence on the Thule Society was undeniable, from their shared obsession with ceremonial magic to their use of tarot and astrology. But while the Golden Dawn sought personal spiritual enlightenment, the Thule Society weaponized mysticism. They stripped away the introspection, keeping only the trappings, the sigils, the invocations, and repurposed them as tools for racial purification. When Golden Dawn members meditated on the Kabbalistic tree of life, they envisioned cosmic harmony. Thule initiates saw a battlefield diagram for Aryan domination. The most chilling parallel, though, was with the Order of the New Templars, an anti-Semitic group founded by Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels. Lanz's magazine Ostara peddled fantasies of blonde godmen battling beast-like subhumans, a blueprint the Thule Society eagerly plagiarized. Lanz even claimed to have inspired Hitler, though historians debate the extent of their contact. What's undeniable is how these groups fed off each other's paranoia, each adding layers of absurdity to the core myth of Aryan godhood. The Thule Society didn't just borrow ideas, they synthesized them into something far more dangerous, turning eclectic spirituality into a unified ideology of hate. Even more obscure groups left their fingerprints. The Armenian Order, founded by Guido von List, convinced the Thule Society that runes weren't just letters, they were magical conduits to ancestral power. List's discoveries of hidden Aryan symbolism in medieval texts became gospel, despite being debunked by actual linguists. Meanwhile, the Germanic lore collected by the brothers Grimm, once charming fairy tales, was recast by Thule scholars as coded history, proof of a lost golden age. This wasn't just intellectual theft, it was alchemy transforming folklore into fascist propaganda. The irony, many of these societies despised one another. Freemasons dismissed the Thule as fanatics. Golden Dawn members would have recoiled at their racial theories. Yet the Thule Society cherry-picked the most corrosive elements from each, blending them into a poison that seeped into the Nazi bloodstream. Their greatest trick wasn't invention, it was distortion, taking fragments of mysticism and forging them into weapons. In the end, their legacy wasn't enlightenment but atrocity, proving how easily the search for hidden truths can become a descent into darkness. The Thule Society's downfall wasn't a sudden collapse, it was a slow unraveling, thread by thread, as the very movement they helped create turned against them. By the early 1930s, the Nazi Party had outgrown its occult roots, and Hitler, ever the pragmatist, saw the Thule Society's mystical theatrics as a liability. Their elaborate rituals and esoteric jargon might have fueled his rise, but now they risked making the regime look like a cabal of superstitious cranks rather than the disciplined political machine he wanted to project. The writing was on the wall long before the Night of the Long Knives, but few in the Thule inner circle dared to read it, infighting tore at the group from within. Rudolf von Sebottendorff, the Society's founder, had been ousted as early as 1919 amid accusations of financial mismanagement and erratic behavior. His successors, men like Dietrich Eckart and Alfred Rosenberg, were too busy jockeying for influence in the Nazi Party to maintain the Thule's cohesion. Eckart's death in 1923 removed one of the last bridges between the old guard and Hitler's inner circle, leaving the Society adrift. Without their charismatic propagandist, the Thule's gatherings devolved into squabbles over arcane doctrine, their once grand visions diluted by petty rivalries. Then came Hitler's purge. The Night of the Long Knives in 1934 wasn't just about eliminating political threats like Ernst Röhm and the SA. It was a clear message to anyone clinging to the revolutionary mysticism of the early movement. The SS, now ascendant under Himmler, had no patience for amateur occultists. While Himmler would later indulge his own esoteric fantasies, he did so under the strict hierarchy of the state, not some independent lodge. The Thule Society, with its private rituals and semi-autonomous structure, was an affront to the total control Hitler demanded. Its members were tolerated only as long as they proved useful, and by the mid-30s most had outlived their purpose. The final blow came quietly. Unlike the SA, the Thule wasn't violently disbanded, it was simply sidelined, its meetings monitored, its publications censored, its members absorbed into party bureaucracy or cast aside. By 1935, the Munich Lodge had shuttered its doors, its library confiscated by the SS. Some former members, like Rosenberg, retained influence by sanitizing their rhetoric, scrubbing the overt occultism from their speeches. Others faded into obscurity, their dreams of Aryan revival co-opted and sterilized by the regime they helped build. The irony was bitter. The Thule Society had handed the Nazis their mythology, their symbols, even their early funding, only to be discarded once their ideas were institutionalized. Hitler didn't need a secret society whispering in his ear when he had the entire apparatus of the state at his command. In the end, the Thule's greatest legacy wasn't its survival, but its obsolescence. They had sown the seeds of a nightmare, only to wake up and realize they were no longer the ones holding the reins. After the war, the wreckage of the Third Reich became fertile ground for wild speculation, where the line between historical fact and pulp fiction blurred beyond recognition. Among the most persistent myths, that the Thule Society had unlocked otherworldly technology, flying discs, anti-gravity engines, even time travel, whispered into existence by their occult rituals. These stories didn't emerge from nowhere. In the chaos of 1945, Allied troops stumbling upon Nazi research facilities found bizarre prototypes, odd-shaped aircraft, rocket blueprints, even sketches of saucer-like vehicles. But here's the crucial distinction. These weren't proof of esoteric breakthroughs, just the desperate flailings of a regime clutching at any hope of a wonder weapon. The myth of Nazi UFOs sprang from this confusion, fueled by Soviet disinformation campaigns and the same gullibility that once made the Thule Society believe in hollow earth kingdoms. Take the so-called Die Glocke, or the Bell, a supposed Nazi time machine powered by mysterious crystals. This legend, popularized by fringe authors decades after the war, claims the device could bend space-time, a fantasy straight out of Thule's playbook. In reality, declassified documents reveal it was likely an experimental engine component, misidentified and mythologized by post-war conspiracy theorists. The same goes for claims that Thule scientists had reverse-engineered alien technology from crashed UFOs. Not a single shred of credible evidence supports this, yet the idea persists, proof of how easily Nazi mysticism mutates into modern folklore. But while the UFO tales are easily debunked, the Thule Society's darker legacy proved far more adaptable. Neo-Nazi groups in the late 20th century revived their esoteric obsession, repackaging rune magic and Hyperborean fantasies for a new generation. The Black Sun symbol, once hidden in Wewelsburg Castle, now adorns extremist tattoos and propaganda videos. Modern white supremacists crib Thule's pseudoscience, claiming DNA holds Aryan memories or that meditation can awaken racial purity. It's the same old madness with a digital veneer. Online forums replacing secret lodges, hate speech disguised as spiritual awakening. Pop culture, ironically, has done more to keep Thule's myths alive than any extremist group. Films like Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark or Hellboy feature Nazi occultists hunting relics with world-ending power, blending real history with Hollywood spectacle. The tropes are familiar: black-clad SS mages chanting over ancient artifacts, hidden bases in Antarctica, lost Atlantean superweapons. These stories entertain, but they also risk sanitizing the truth, turning the Thule Society's delusions into thrilling adventure fodder rather than warnings of how mythology can fuel genocide. The lesson here isn't just about separating fact from fiction. It's about recognizing how easily the Thule Society's brand of mystical fascism reinvents itself. From UFO conspiracy boards to extremist manifestos, their ideas metastasize because they offer something seductive: the promise of hidden knowledge, of power just waiting to be reclaimed. The real horror isn't that people believe Nazis built flying saucers, it's that the same old lies keep finding new audiences, dressed up in whatever glitter catches the eye of the disaffected. The Thule Society may have vanished, but the void it sought to fill still yawns wide, waiting for the next generation to mistake myth for destiny. Among the strangest and most destructive ideas the Thule Society championed was the world ice theory, a pseudoscientific dogma claiming the universe itself was shaped by cosmic ice battles. Developed by Austrian engineer Hans Herbiger in the early 20th century, this bizarre concept proposed that ice wasn't just frozen water, but a fundamental force governing celestial mechanics. Stars, planets, even human history supposedly hinged on clashes between ice and fire across the cosmos. To most scientists, this was laughable nonsense. But to the Thule Society, it was divine revelation, the perfect proof that Aryans, as children of the icy north, were destined to rule. Herbiger's theory read like bad fantasy. He insisted planets like Earth were once encased in layers of crystalline ice, shattered by fiery explosions that birthed new worlds. These cataclysms supposedly aligned with ancient myths, floods, fallen civilizations, even the Norse apocalypse Ragnarök. The Thule Society seized on these parallels, declaring world ice theory not just science, but sacred Aryan cosmology. Their newsletter published feverish editorials connecting Herbiger's ice moons to Hyperborean legends, while members like Rudolf Hess lobbied to have it taught in schools. By the 1930s, Nazi educators were force-feeding children textbooks claiming ice crystals held racial memory, and that Aryans evolved their blonde hair and blue eyes as adaptations to primordial glaciers. But the real damage came when this pseudoscience collided with real archaeology. The ONUNRB, Himmler's crackpot research division, dispatched teams across Europe and Asia not to uncover facts but to fabricate them. In Scandinavia, they dug up Viking sites, cherry-picking artifacts that proved Germanic superiority while ignoring evidence of cultural exchange. In the Caucasus Mountains, SS officers measured skulls with calipers, searching for Nordic features among local tribes, then falsified data when the results didn't fit. One notorious expedition to Bohuslän, Sweden, even chiseled modern runes onto ancient petroglyphs, literally rewriting history to match Thule mythology. The most grotesque distortion came in Tibet, when Ernst Scheffer's 1938 expedition failed to find evidence of Aryan ancestors. They simply invented it. Photos of Tibetan monks were airbrushed to lighten their skin. Ceremonial objects were mislabeled as Proto-Germanic. Back in Berlin, these lies were displayed at a touring exhibition called The Eternal Heritage, where Nazi officials pointed to mannequins in faux Himalayan robes as lost Aryan brothers. The message was clear: science wasn't a search for truth, but a tool for propaganda. World ice theory's collapse was as swift as it was damning. By 1942, even Nazi physicists quietly abandoned it. Rocket engineers at Peenemünde openly mocked Herberger's frozen fairy tales. Yet its legacy lingered in the regime's obsession with cold as a purifying force. The death camp's industrial slaughter was rationalized as racial hygiene, a chilling echo of the Thule Society's ice-bound fantasies. Frozen pseudoscience couldn't win the war, but for a time it helped freeze the conscience of a nation. The lesson wasn't just that bad ideas fail, it was how easily they can become excuses for atrocity while they last. Far removed from the rubble of World War II, the twisted mythology of the Thule Society refuses to stay buried. Today, a new generation of extremists has dusted off their runes and rituals, repackaging occult fascism for the digital age. From obscure online forums to extremist manifestos, the old lies about Hyperborean supermen and Aryan destiny are back, this time fueled by social media algorithms and the seductive allure of secret knowledge. These modern groups don't just admire the Thule Society's aesthetics, they've resurrected its core delusion that white supremacy isn't just politics, but a sacred duty encoded in ancient symbols and lost civilizations. Take the rise of the so-called Black Sun networks, decentralized online communities where Nazi mysticism masquerades as spiritual awakening. Their websites peddle rune yoga tutorials alongside conspiracy theories, claiming meditating on the Sewillow symbol can activate Aryan DNA. Sound familiar? It's the same pseudoscience the Thule Society pushed a century ago, now rebranded with glossy infographics and influencer-style videos. Even their terminology mirrors Thule's obsession, calling themselves folkish instead of racist, framing bigotry as racial awakening, and weaponizing nostalgia for a golden age that never existed. Then there's the alarming resurgence of Atlantis mythology in far-right circles. Online forums buzz with threads about globalist elites hiding evidence of a white Atlantean civilization, twisting Plato's allegory into a racial battleground. Some even claim to be bloodline detectives, using dubious genetic testing to prove descent from Atlantis, a direct echo of the Thule Society's obsession with Grail bloodlines. The most extreme factions take it further, hosting ritual camps in remote forests where initiates swear oaths over stolen artifacts, convinced they're reclaiming their ancestors' stolen power. What makes this revival so dangerous is how it launders hatred through spirituality. By framing white supremacy as ancient wisdom, these groups bypass political scrutiny, attracting disaffected seekers who'd never join a skinhead march but might dabble in Nordic meditation. The symbols help the Valknut, once a Norse emblem of mortality, now tattooed on extremists as a badge of martyrdom. The Algiers rune, historically representing protection, twisted into a call to arms. Even the Thule Society's old recruiting tactic, using occult mystery to mask violent goals, has found new life in meme culture, where ironic humor blurs into radicalization. The darkest irony: many of these modern adherents reject the label Nazi while regurgitating Thule dogma verbatim. They'll dismiss Hitler as a controlled opposition figure, yet cite Julius Evola's writings on racial hierarchy as gospel. They mock Himmler's SS rituals but perform their own versions, swapping black robes for cargo pants and live-streaming ceremonies to Telegram channels. It's the same poison in a new bottle, a reminder that fascism doesn't die, it just learns new languages, and here's where history's warning rings loudest. The Thule Society didn't start with death camps. It began with book clubs and stargazing circles, convincing ordinary people that mythology justified monstrous acts. Today's extremists follow the same playbook, wrapping genocide in runes and calling it enlightenment. The stakes are just as high now as they were then, not because these groups wield state power yet, but because they've mastered the art of making madness sound sacred. The past isn't repeating itself, but it's rhyming, and the echo grows louder every time someone mistakes fantasy for history or hatred for heritage. The Thule Society's shadow stretches far beyond history books. It lurks in the neon glow of video game screens, the pulpy pages of conspiracy novels, and the high-budget set pieces of Hollywood blockbusters. Take the Wolfenstein series, where the Nazis aren't just armed with tanks and rifles, but with plasma cannons and robot soldiers, their technology fueled by Thule's occult research. Here, the Society isn't a footnote, it's the driving force behind a dystopian world where Hitler won the war, thanks to stolen relics and alien-like superweapons. The games exaggerate their mysticism into something almost demonic, with SS officers chanting over glowing runes or resurrecting undead warriors. It's over the top, but it taps into a very real fear. What if the Nazis had actually weaponized their craziest fantasies? Then there's The Morning of the Magicians, the 1960 book that practically invented the modern conspiracy thriller. Its authors, Louis Pauwels and Jacques Bergier, framed the Thule Society as a cabal of dark sorcerers who whispered secrets into Hitler's ear, blending half-truths with wild speculation. They popularized the idea that Thule members had access to ancient Atlantean tech or Vril energy, turning historical fringe theories into a blueprint for decades of paranormal fiction. The book's influence is everywhere, from Raiders of the Lost Ark's Nazi occultists to Hellboy's apocalyptic fascist mages. These stories thrive on a tantalizing question: what if the Thule Society's myths weren't just delusions but dangerous, hidden truths? Films have taken even greater liberties. In the 2004 movie Hellboy, the Thule Society's remnants summon a cosmic beast in a last-ditch effort to reclaim power, their rituals ripped straight from Himmler's Wewelsburg playbook. The Society's aesthetic black robes, rune-carved daggers, obsession with interdimensional gateways has become shorthand for Nazi dark magic in pop culture. Even when they're not named directly, the tropes are unmistakable. The fascist villains scouring Tibet for relics in Indiana Jones, the secret Antarctic bases in Iron Sky, the occult detectives unraveling Thule-linked conspiracies in shows like The Man in the High Castle. But here's the twist: these exaggerated portrayals often obscure the real horror. By turning the Thule Society into cartoonish sorcerers or sci-fi supervillains, we risk forgetting how mundane their evil actually was. They weren't wizards, they were bureaucrats with a taste for mythology. Their power didn't come from cursed artifacts, it came from propaganda, bank accounts, and the willingness to dehumanize millions. The scariest part of their legacy isn't the fictionalized versions, but the very real way their ideas keep resurfacing, repackaged for new generations who mistake the aesthetics for something harmless. Pop culture loves a good villain, but the Thule Society's true story doesn't need embellishment to chill the blood. The facts are frightening enough. Was the Thule Society truly the hidden hand behind Nazi ideology, or have we inflated their importance with the benefit of hindsight? Historians remain sharply divided, and the skeptics make a compelling case. One school of thought argues the group was little more than a gathering of eccentric mystics, their influence exaggerated by post-war conspiracy theorists eager to blame occultism for the Holocaust rather than acknowledge the banal reality that ordinary people, not spell-casting fanatics, carried out genocide. After all, most Nazi officials distanced themselves from Thule's occult trappings once in power. Heinrich Himmler's esoteric hobbies were tolerated more than celebrated, and Hitler himself mocked dabbling in rune magic in private conversations. The numbers tell part of the story. At its peak, the Thule Society boasted only a few hundred members, a drop in the ocean of far-right groups swirling through Weimar Germany. Compare that to the millions who later joined the Nazi Party, most of whom had never heard of Hyperborea or Vril energy. Even key Thule figures like Dietrich Eckart were political operatives first, occult hobbyists second. Their real power lay in networking with industrialists and military officers, not chanting in candlelit lodges, the infamous swastika. While Thule popularized its use in far-right circles, the symbol had already been appropriated by nationalist groups across Europe. Their branding success wasn't unique, just better documented, but here's where the skeptics might underestimate Thule's insidious role. Influence isn't always measured in membership rolls or policy papers. The society functioned as an ideological petri dish, incubating ideas too extreme for mainstream politics until the moment was ripe. Think of it like a radical think tank, small in size, outsized in shaping the Overton window. Their newsletters and salons didn't just preach to the choir, they groomed future Nazi leaders. Rudolf Hess and Alfred Rosenberg didn't need daily rituals to internalize Thule's core myth. That history was a racial battleground demanding purification. By the time these ideas reached Hitler's inner circle, the occult wrapping paper had been discarded, but the poison inside remained. The strongest evidence against dismissing Thule as fringe lies in their access. Bankrolling Hitler's early rallies wasn't the work of isolated cranks, it required deep pockets and political connections. Hugo Boss's financial support, the Völkischer Beobachter's propaganda platform, even the future Reichsleiter who passed through Thule's doors, all suggest a group punching far above its weight. Historian Nicholas Goodrick Clark notes how Thule's blend of conspiracy theories and pseudo-history provided intellectual cover for anti-Semitism, transforming ancient hatreds into a grand cosmic narrative. Their real power wasn't in summoning demons, but in making genocide feel inevitable, even sacred. Perhaps the fairest assessment is this: the Thule Society didn't single-handedly create Nazism, but they helped weaponize its mythology. Without them, the Nazi movement might still have embraced racial supremacy, but would it have framed mass murder as a spiritual crusade? Would the SS have marched under stolen runes, or Himmler's archaeologists dug for Atlantean relics? Thule's legacy isn't in what they accomplished, but in how they blurred the line between madness and ideology, turning fairy tales into fuel for the furnaces of Auschwitz. That's not outsized influence, it's a warning about how easily fantasy can become fatal when it falls on eager ears. The paper trail left by the Thule Society isn't just incomplete, it's a labyrinth of deliberate obfuscation and tantalizing gaps, a rabbit hole where every missing document feeds a dozen conspiracy theories. Take the Munich Lodge's archives, supposedly packed with membership rolls and ritual texts. When Allied troops reached the city in 1945, they found only ashes. The building had been gutted by fire, its library reduced to charred fragments. Some claim the SS torched it to hide compromising connections. Others whisper that Thule members themselves lit the match, determined to take their secrets to the grave. Among the few surviving papers was a partial ledger listing cryptic payments to E.H. initials, some link to early Nazi financier Emil Herz, though historians still debate whether it's a smoking gun or a red herring. Then there's the case of Rudolf von Sebottendorff's suppressed memoir. In 1933, just as Hitler seized power, the Thule founder published Before Hitler Came, boasting of the Society's role in shaping Nazi ideology. The book vanished almost overnight, pulled from shelves by Gestapo order. Less than a dozen copies survived, their pages hinting at explosive claims, like Thule members orchestrating the assassination of communist leader Kurt Eisner to destabilize Bavaria. Was this truth or self-aggrandizing fantasy? We'll never know for certain. The Gestapo didn't just ban the book, they reportedly interrogated Sebottendorff, who later fled to Turkey under mysterious circumstances. His 1945 suicide in the Bosphorus, just as Nuremberg prosecutors sought his testimony, still raises eyebrows. Even more intriguing are the missing diaries of Karl Horshofer, the geopolitics guru who mentored Rudolf Hess. Horshofer's theories about living space became Nazi doctrine, but his private journals filled with references to Tibetan mysticism and Thule's inner circle were confiscated by U.S. intelligence after the war. Declassified memos reveal agents found passages about energy vortices and astral gateways, suggesting Horshofer's academic work masked deeper esoteric beliefs. Yet the most volatile notebooks vanished en route to Washington, leaving researchers to wonder, did they contain proof of Thule's political backchanneling, or were they destroyed because they veered too close to exposing occult influences at the highest levels? The fragmentary evidence invites wild speculation. A 1946 OSS report describes a cache of Thule-linked artifacts discovered in a Bavarian salt mine: runestones, ceremonial daggers, even what was labeled a skull capacitor for storing ancestral memories. The items were shipped to an army storage facility in Virginia, then disappeared from inventory logs. Decades later, conspiracy hunters claimed the CIA experimented with the artifacts during Cold War mind control programs, though no declassified documents confirm this. More concrete are the surviving letters of Thule member Maria Orzik, a medium who claimed to channel messages from Aryan spirits in Atlantis. Her final note, postmarked December 1944, warned of doors better left unopened before she and her occultist circle vanished without trace. What makes these gaps so fertile for conspiracy theories isn't just the absence of facts, but the patterns they suggest. When records are systematically destroyed or concealed, it's human nature to assume the worst. The Thule Society's archival ghosts, whether lost to fire, suppression, or deliberate theft, create a Rorschach test where skeptics see chaos and believers see proof of hidden histories. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility isn't that the missing documents contained earth-shattering revelations, but that they revealed how flimsy the whole edifice really was, how a handful of deluded mystics could rewrite history's margins until the ink bled into the center of the page. The aftermath of World War I left Germany not just defeated but spiritually gutted, a nation scrambling for meaning in the wreckage of shattered pride. Amid this collective trauma, the Thule Society didn't just offer conspiracy theories, they sold cosmic purpose. Their blend of mysticism and racism functioned like a psychological balm, soothing the wounds of humiliation with grandiose fantasies. Imagine being told your suffering wasn't random, that it was part of an ancient battle between divine Aryans and shadowy forces, a narrative where you weren't a victim but a hero awaiting awakening. This wasn't mere propaganda, it was alchemy transforming despair into delusional grandeur. At its core, the Thule ideology preyed on three primal human needs: belonging, significance, and simplicity. In a society fractured by political violence and economic collapse, their lodges provided clandestine camaraderie, an exclusive club where members weren't just activists but initiates guarding sacred truth. The rituals, with their hooded secrecy and runic oaths, lent everyday bigotry the aura of holy war. A shopkeeper who'd lost his savings to inflation could now see himself as a warrior in a millennia-old struggle, his mundane grievances elevated to cosmic stakes. The Thule's genius was in repackaging racism as enlightenment, framing hatred not as malice but as sacred duty. Their mythology also offered an addictive cocktail of nostalgia and futurism. By claiming Aryans were descendants of Hyperborean god-kings, they fed the longing for a golden age, while simultaneously promising that this glory could be reclaimed through racial purity. It was a double fantasy, the comfort of ancestral greatness paired with the thrill of imminent revolution. This duality resonated powerfully in a culture torn between romanticizing medieval knights and marveling at modern factories. The Thule vision merged both, suggesting that cutting-edge science like Vril energy or eugenics could restore ancient divinity. Crucially, their conspiracy theories provided easy answers to complex pain. Versailles' punitive treaties, Weimar's political chaos, even the flu pandemic, none were random tragedies or policy failures. According to Thule dogma, they were chess moves in a Jewish plot dating back to Atlantis. This paranoid world, simplified reality into stark binaries: Aryans versus subhumans, purity versus corruption, hidden masters versus awakened heroes. For those drowning in post-war complexity, such clarity felt like revelation. The most dangerous appeal, though, lay in their cosmic fatalism. By framing history as a cycle of racial ascension and decline, the Thule Society made violence feel inevitable. If Aryans were destined to rule, then genocide wasn't cruelty, it was cosmic hygiene, a necessary step to trigger the next golden age. This perverse teleology absolved followers of guilt. They weren't murderers but midwives to destiny. When Hitler later spoke of the Third Reich lasting 1,000 years, he wasn't just making a boast, he was invoking Thule's cyclical mysticism, where every Holocaust was a prelude to rebirth. What made this ideology so virulent wasn't its originality, but its adaptability. It absorbed fragments of genuine spiritual yearning, the human hunger for transcendence, and twisted them into weapons. The same archetypes that inspire hero myths or utopian dreams became justification for gas chambers. This is why the Thule Society's legacy terrifies, not because their ideas were powerful, but because they revealed how easily the sacred can be hijacked, how quickly the search for meaning can curdle into a license for atrocity. Their believers didn't join because they were monsters. They joined because the story was irresistible, a tale that made them the protagonists of history rather than its collateral damage. Studying the Thule Society forces us to confront an uncomfortable paradox. How do we examine toxic ideologies without accidentally amplifying them? This isn't just an academic debate. When historians dissect the Society's runes and rituals, there's always the risk of romanticizing their mystique, of turning their hateful fantasies into intriguing lore. Take their obsession with Hyperborea on one hand. It's crucial to understand how this mythical homeland became a justification for genocide. On the other, detailing their elaborate Atlantean theories risks making their ideology sound imaginative rather than monstrous. The line between scrutiny and sensationalism is razor-thin. Some scholars argue that ignoring the Thule Society's influence whitewashes history. Without examining their role in shaping Nazi symbolism and racial policies, we miss a critical piece of how ordinary people become complicit in atrocity. When museums display SS regalia or documentaries animate their rituals, they're not endorsing the ideas, they're exposing their mechanics. The swastika's evolution from sacred symbol to Nazi emblem, for instance, reveals how easily cultural heritage can be weaponized. But this approach demands nuance. A 2019 exhibition in Berlin sparked outrage by displaying Thule artifacts without sufficiently contextualizing their role in enabling violence. The exhibit wasn't wrong to show the material, it failed by not making the human cost visceral enough. Others warn that even critical attention feeds the beast. Neo-Nazi groups actively mine scholarly work on the Thule Society, cherry-picking footnotes to legitimize their own twisted ideologies. When academics publish detailed analyses of Thule's cosmology, those same texts sometimes appear in extremist forums as proof of Aryan supremacy. The infamous Black Sun symbol, once confined to obscure papers, now thrives in online hate communities precisely because its history was documented so thoroughly. This creates a catch-22. Silence allows myths to fester, but scrutiny risks providing extremists with intellectual ammunition. The dilemma deepens when we consider pop culture's role. Video games like Wolfenstein or films like Hellboy portray Thule, inspired villains with supernatural powers which can trivialize the real-world harm of their ideology. When audiences watch Nazis summoning demons, the actual horrors of death camps can feel distant by comparison. Yet these portrayals also serve as cautionary tales, showing how easily esoteric fantasies mutate into fascism. The key lies in framing. Does the story condemn the delusion, or does it make evil look thrillingly esoteric? Perhaps the solution lies in a simple but uncomfortable truth. We must study the Thule Society not for their mythology, but for their methodology. Their real power wasn't in runes or relics. It was in their ability to dress bigotry in the robes of sacred tradition. By focusing less on their cosmic delusions and more on their recruitment tactics, how they exploited economic despair, how they weaponized nostalgia, we turn them from dark wizards into the far more frightening reality, ordinary men who convinced themselves that murder was magic. The goal isn't to erase their history, but to expose their lies so completely that no one could ever mistake them for wisdom again. The Thule Society stands as one of history's most chilling warnings, proof that even the most absurd ideas can metastasize into catastrophe when they feed on fear and longing. What began as a fringe gathering of mystics and malcontents spiraled into an ideological blueprint for genocide, not because their beliefs were true, but because they offered desperate people a seductive story. The real lesson here isn't just about Nazis or occultism, it's about the anatomy of radicalization itself, the alchemy that transforms wild theories into weapons. Consider how their mythology worked. The Thule Society didn't invent racism or nationalism, but they repackaged them as sacred quests. By framing Aryan supremacy as a cosmic struggle rather than mere bigotry, they made prejudice feel like enlightenment. This is how fringe ideas gain traction, not through logic but through emotional alchemy. When people are humiliated by war or economic collapse, as Germany was after 1918, they don't just want solutions, they want redemption. The Thule Society offered both, promising that every hardship was part of a grander narrative where they were the heroes, not the victims. The danger lies in the pattern, not just the particulars. Modern extremists still mimic this playbook, swapping Hyperborea for other lost golden ages, recycling the same paranoid tropes about hidden elites and racial destiny. You'll find it in white supremacist forums that preach blood and soil while trading tips on rune meditation, or in conspiracy movements that recast bigotry as awakening. The packaging changes, but the psychological hooks remain identical. The allure of secret knowledge, the promise of belonging, the satisfaction of having complex problems reduced to a simple villain. Yet the Thule Society's legacy also reveals our own vulnerabilities. Humans are storytelling creatures. We crave narratives that make sense of chaos, and we're disturbingly willing to embrace toxic fictions if they soothe our anxieties. This isn't just a historical fluke, it's a recurring flaw in how we process truth. When conspiracy theories surge during crises, whether pandemics or political upheavals, they're tapping into the same instinct that made Thule's fantasies so sticky. The desperate need to believe someone's in control, even if that someone is evil. So how do we inoculate ourselves? First, by recognizing that no ideology is harmless just because it's dressed in spirituality or pseudo-history. The Thule Society's members saw themselves as intellectuals, not thugs. They quoted ancient texts while planning pogroms. Today's extremists similarly hide behind irony or esotericism, masking hate as heritage. Vigilance means questioning not just blatant lies, but the emotional payoffs they offer. Why does this story feel satisfying? Who benefits if I believe it? Second, we must refuse to let myths displace facts, no matter how glamorous they seem. The Thule Society thrived by blurring lines between legend and reality until their followers couldn't tell the difference. In an age of deepfakes and algorithmically amplified disinformation, that tactic is more dangerous than ever. The antidote isn't just debunking falsehoods, it's nurturing media literacy that teaches people to interrogate the stories they're sold, to ask who wrote this script and why. Most crucially, we have to confront the voids these ideologies fill. The Thule Society didn't recruit through brute force. They offered meaning to the disenfranchised, a sense of purpose to the disillusioned. If we want to dismantle toxic movements, we must address those yearnings head-on, providing communities and causes that connect people without dehumanizing others. Because history shows us the darkest truths, that hatred often masquerades as hope, that genocide can be sold as destiny, and that the road to atrocity is paved not with monsters, but with true believers who thought they were saving the world. The Thule Society's legacy is a paradox, a cocktail of laughable pseudoscience and unfathomable horror, proving how easily fantasy can be weaponized when it taps into humanity's deepest fears and desires. These weren't just eccentrics dabbling in rune rituals. They were myth-makers who understood that stories, no matter how absurd, could rewrite reality when whispered into the right ears. Their greatest trick wasn't summoning cosmic forces, it was convincing ordinary people that genocide was a sacred duty, that gas chambers were altars in a holy war to resurrect Atlantis. The swastika's twisted journey from an ancient solar symbol to the banner of industrialized slaughter exposes the alchemy at work. Take a fragment of truth, steep it in paranoia, and forge it into a weapon that outlives its creators. But here's the unsettling question that lingers like smoke from their burned archives. What makes this kind of myth-making so dangerously sticky? The answer lies in the emotional circuitry it hijacks. The Thule Society didn't sell racism as hatred. They sold it as belonging, packaging bigotry as an exclusive club where initiates guarded, hidden truths. Their Atlantis wasn't just a sunken city. It was a trauma narrative explaining German defeat not as the result of complex geopolitics, but as the work of shadowy villains poisoning Aryan bloodlines. Conspiracy theories thrive on this same formula today, whether it's QAnon's secret cabal or white supremacist fantasies of the Great Replacement. The medium changes, runes become memes, large meetings become Discord channels, but the psychological hooks remain identical. Consider the modern echoes. When extremists claim to be rediscovering Viking heritage while ignoring historical evidence of diverse Norse trade networks, they're repeating the Thule playbook, cherry-picking the past to justify present hatred. When online forums promote racial yoga or DNA awakening, they're rebranding Vril energy for the genomic age. Even the obsession with fallen civilizations persists, from apocalyptic prepper cults convinced society will collapse to neo-fascists fetishizing a fictional European Middle Ages unsullied by cultural exchange. The specifics mutate, but the core fantasy endures: purity lost, enemies to blame, and redemption through violence. This isn't just about Nazis or the occult, it's about the human brain's vulnerability to grand narratives that simplify chaos. The Thule Society's myth succeeded because they transformed humiliation into heroism, offering followers a starring role in a cosmic drama. Today's dangerous ideologies do the same, whether they're rooted in ethno-nationalism, apocalyptic religion, or even extremist environmentalism that frames humanity as a virus needing eradication. The through line is always the same: the promise that your suffering isn't random, that the world's complexities can be reduced to a battle between light and darkness, with you, of course, on the side of light. So where do we go from here? The lesson isn't to avoid mythology, but to confront its power, to recognize that every culture has its founding stories, and the real test is whether those stories open minds or close hearts. When archetypes like Atlantis or Hyperborea resurface, we should ask, is this inspiring curiosity or justifying exclusion? Are these symbols being used to explore or to erase? The Thule Society's greatest crime wasn't believing in lost civilizations. It was insisting that reclaiming them required erasing others. Their ghosts still whisper from the margins, but silencing them starts with something deceptively simple: choosing stories that unite rather than divide, that ignite wonder instead of wrath. After all, the antidote to a poisonous myth isn't no myth, it's a better one.